Hey, this is Hunter with Lone Star Woodworking, and in this video I do some sketchy stuff with a router. I try my hand at building a custom wooden base, and I say into a crazy high sheen just to see what happens. Alright guys, before we get into the meat of the video, I have to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, because it has been almost 3 freaking months since my last video, and the channel continued to grow throughout that entire time. So if you're a part of the one of new, I think close to 300 or 400 new subscribers, I'm really happy to have you along for the ride. If you're one of those people that viewed just one of my videos and added to the couple thousand new views I saw on some of my videos, thank you as well. And if you are a returning and recurring subscriber that has watched all of my videos or any video leading up to this one, I'm happy you're here too. Thank you all so much. All right, so the wood that we are using is cottonwood, and it's not just any cottonwood. It has an incredible amount of figuring in it. You can kind of see it there already. Lots of curl, a little bit of quilting, some burl, and something called chatoyancy, which is kind of a holographic effect that grain can give off sometimes, and it's right up there near that knot. It's really hard to see right now, but you'll see it more clearly here in a few minutes. Now, once I got this thing cut down to size and kind of shaved off that really thin top section, I started just cleaning it up. And you'll notice there, that's not my 3M sander. The 3M sander actually had a failsafe on it that prevented it from working if it overheated, which was happening a lot, and it was really disrupting the workflow. So I unfortunately had to get rid of that in favor of this Bosch sander, so that way I can actually keep on working. Now, after I got it cleaned up and sanded off initially, I put those 2 pictures up, and I just wanted to see what people thought about the 2 sides. I wanted to see which side they would want as the top. And the opinions were overwhelmingly in favor of the first picture, so that's the one we're going to use for the top. And with that decision made, I went ahead and set the top aside so that way I could get to work on the base. And the idea that I have for this is I'm going to use this jig from Blacktail Studio. It's the wine glass table leg jig, but I'm not going to make 2 28-inch legs because this isn't a dining table or a desk. This is a coffee table, which needs to stand about 18 inches. So I'm going to see if I can modify the design a little bit and basically make a pedestal base that has 4 flanges or feet that come off of either end. And if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, it will in a little bit. But for right now, I just need to roughly cut out the shape. And whenever you are cutting these on the bandsaw or a jigsaw, it's really important that you put those relief cuts that I put in there because it prevents the blade from binding and breaking. Now, just to get these pieces down to their actual size that I need them to be just for the glue up, I had a couple of different ideas on here, and I'll be honest, none of them were really all that good. You can see here that I was having a whole lot of trouble with this technique in the next one after this because the work pieces kept moving, the router wasn't very stable, the whole thing just felt very unsafe, and I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of control of the router, which obviously is just kind of this nerve-wracking feeling to have anyway. This worked out a little bit better, but the issue that I was still running into was lack of control over that router, and this is what I came up with. And we've all seen videos like this where people will put their flush trim or their small routers on their table, clamp it down, and do kind of edge work where they'll put a round over on it. But this is particularly dangerous with these flush trim bits because it did take the jig from me a couple times and almost sent my hand directly into that bit. And that would have been a bad day for everybody. I'm going to build myself a router table eventually, so if you were going to tell me that in the comments, you're probably still going to. But I'm going to build myself a router table eventually. It's just going to be incorporated into the new workbench that I build myself, which is still a couple months away. So if you are a little bit confused on what's going on, all I had to do was create another shaft section to glue onto the sides of this initial glue up, so that way it had a more symmetrical shape, or just a shape that I liked better. After that, I just tacked it on with some brad nails, put some clamps on there with some glue, and this is what I had. It's not bad. Not for a first time anyway. There were a lot of high spots that needed to be kind of roughed out, and I had no problem putting a flat disc on my angle grinder and just going at it like this. This was going to take way too long if I was going to sand it, But once it was roughed out, I took it back inside, put a soft pad on my sander so that way it would kind of contour around these weird edges, and started sanding off some of the flap disc marks and some of these burn marks. In all reality, I probably didn't have to spend as much time as I did on that because it's going to get stained black anyway. But it made me feel better just to do it. And you know, this is just something that happens when you hand make stuff. It was a little bit uneven, so I just had to sand off some of the high spots on them, parts of the legs or parts of the feet, I guess. And it evened out just fine. It was a really, really quick fix. I think I spent maybe 10 minutes fixing that little wobble. And then after that, I sanded the entire base up to just 180. I wasn't trying to go terribly high up there simply because the stain and the finish needs something to grab onto. And this is the stain that I'm going to try to use. And I'm going to try to use this twice. And I'm just going to be flat out with you guys. I ended up spray painting this thing with some industrial spray paint that's made to pretty much grip onto anything. And the reason being is that whenever I stained it the first time, this is what I ended up with. And this looks like something that my dog left in the yard after she ate something that didn't agree with her stomach. This looked so bad, and I thought, okay, you know, maybe I can be patient, give it another try a different way of applying it, see what happens. And that worked out a little bit better, but it ended up still being really splotchy and ugly, and I just really didn't want to continue with this process. So I spray painted it, and this gave me the effect that I wanted because you can still kind of see the texture of the grain, which is what I was going for here. And I got a little excited. I was like, okay, you know, the base build is going pretty well, and I want to see what it looks like. Some of you who have a little bit better depth perception than others can already identify the issue here. This base was way too tall. It was 23.5 inches tall. And if you don't know, a coffee table, the generally accepted height for a coffee table is 18 inches, which means that this thing was 23.5, 24 inches tall just on its own, along with a 2-inch thick top. That was going to put it at 26 inches tall. That is like side table height. So I had to cut about 10 inches off the shaft section, glue it back together, and it ended up going pretty well. Somehow I kept the edges or the cuts nice and straight. Don't ask me how. Anyway, after I glued that together and got the shape back to where I wanted it to, I started working on the top. And the very first thing I'm going to do is fill in the 3 big voids that are on the top with some tabletop epoxy, activated charcoal, and I'm using aluminum tape to tape up the bottom. And the reason I use aluminum tape, despite the fact that it's extremely expensive, is that it just adheres better to multiple surfaces, whereas painter's tape, it's hit or miss onto whether or not it will actually grip onto the wood. At least in my experience. You might have better experiences than I do. And there is your gratuitous epoxy pour into a deep void. And while it says optional on the box, it's not really. With this tabletop epoxy, you need to come back and pop all the bubbles. Next, I had to contend with this low spot. And this kind of happens sometimes in the milling process. For some reason, especially in these softer woods, and if you're a sawmill guy, please clarify this because I don't think that my explanation is going to be super clear. But basically with these softer woods, if the bandsaw hits a particularly soft spot, it has a tendency to flex because the tension on the blade isn't the same all the way through the slab. So it kind of dips into that softer area and cuts it like that and creates that kind of low valley. Maybe that's correct, maybe it's not. That is my understanding of it. All right, and from there, this Bosch sander really made quick work of those router lines. It has this turbo mode, which basically makes it act a lot like an angle grinder, and it won't slow down no matter how hard you push. Now, as with any epoxy project, there's always going to be these little fixes, and I'm using this Total Boat Thixo. And despite the name, Total Boat, it's honestly not that expensive. And I learned about this from Bourbon Moth Woodworking here on YouTube. And he had a whole review on this, and I thought it was really interesting. It cures in 4 hours, it sands beautifully, and I really wanted to try it out. And it works exactly like the review says. So if you're curious about it, go check him out. I'll do a review on it if you want me to. I'm just letting you know that it's already out there. And from there, I just went into my finish sanding, and I really wanted to highlight the chatoyancy in that knot, or at least I wanted to test if I could. So I sanded dry all the way up to 800 grit because that's as high as my mesh sandpaper goes. And this is what I was left with. This sheen is actually really nice. It's nice and smooth, nice and even, but I still wanted to take this sheen as high as I could go, which was 2000 grit. And when you're wet sanding with these higher grits, you just need to put enough to lubricate the sandpaper across the surface. You don't want to put so much that it saturates the slab itself, because that's actually more detrimental. And this is the sheen I was left with, which was, I don't know, just kind of satisfying to look at. And we'll see what happens when I apply the finish. You let me know if you think it would have made a difference in the end. Now, another thing I really want y'all's opinion on is this base. Again, this is my first time doing this, and it was kind of an experiment the entire way through. I'm going to go ahead and use these threaded inserts to attach it, because you never know, whoever wants this might want this base. They might think it's cool that it's my first attempt at this, and it actually turned out okay. Who knows? But let me know what y'all think. Let me know if you think I should have gone with metal legs, if you think I should have gone with a different design. I don't know. Y'all just let me know what I could try in the future. After I was satisfied with how the base actually attached to the tabletop, I went outside and finished it. And this is just a really simple finish. It's Deft Lacquer. I think this is the satin finish. You can get this at Home Depot. It dries in about 5 minutes if you leave it outside. It dries to the touch anyway. It cures in about an hour. And it's just a super simple application. From there, it was time to finish the top. And this was a little bit frustrating because I used 3/4 of a can of finish on this slab, and you can see that it just keeps on soaking it up. It would not stop. I could not use enough on this, and it was so incredibly frustrating. But I also understand, especially with these soft woods that have a lot of figure in them, that figure tends to be extremely porous areas of the grain. So in all honesty, I probably should have done an epoxy base coat, a lot like I did with my redwood table, and that might have helped a little bit. After I wiped off all the excess, this table was done. Now, I had someone reach out to me and they said that I should discuss the costs of everything, and then on top of that, either what I wanted to sell these pieces for and what I sold these pieces for. And I have no problem doing that. All in all, this piece cost me $475 to build. It cost me $350 for the slab, $25 for what I used out of a $50 epoxy kit, and then about $100 worth of ash that was left over from my last project that made up the base of this table. And as far as what I want to sell this with, I'm currently selling it for $1,200. So if that's something that you're interested in, go ahead and hit me up and we can get the ball rolling on that. And again, I'm totally open to the idea that this base isn't something that you might want. So we can definitely explore other options. All right, guys, that is going to do it for the video. So I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time.